Hello learners, welcome to the 27th lecture in this NPTEL course on the 20th century English novel, which we are studying as it was practiced by a selected group of women writers. I have provided a somewhat detailed biographical as well as cultural background to The Eyes Were Watching God, and I've discussed the place of Zora Neale Hurston within the literary and cultural politics of the Harlem Renaissance, as well as American literature in the early 20th century. I began reading from the novel in the last minute or so of the previous lecture, and this, as well as the subsequent lecture, will comprise readings of key textual moments from the novel. I will try to read as much as I can from the early pages of the novel in order to give you all a sense of what you can expect from this novel. To sort of offer a kind of a teaser or a kind of a trailer to the novel itself. This course is not expansive enough to offer interpretations of each novel that we study. I can provide summary style ideas of different approaches one can take, but in order to provide a detailed interpretation of novel, one would need more time than that. I think it is much more useful to spend the time discussing different possible approaches to situate the writer and the text in a historical and cultural context, and as much as possible to recreate a sense or a feeling of what it would be like to read the novel. So I'll try to create a minuscule version of what it is to read the novel by reading some passages from the early chapters of the novel. The novel opens with a very powerful sentence, and I'll read that sentence along with a few more. In fact, I'll read the first 4 paragraphs, which in my edition, which is the Harper Perennial edition, comprise the first page of the novel. I'll read the first 2 paragraphs, offer some comments, and then go further. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation. His dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men. Now, this paragraph seems to summarize, using a very distinctive image, a lot of thoughts which seeks to define some essential feature of masculinity. What is that? Let's spend a minute trying to understand that. Masculinity, as the narrator defines it in this opening paragraph, has to do with a kind of striving. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. Every man likes to dream or likes to build castles in the air, as the expression goes. And within this larger category of human beings who like to build castles in the air, there are 2 categories. One is that of those who are lucky to have these wishes, these fantasies realized. And the other is that of those who live in resignation, and as the narrator puts it, their dreams mocked to death by time. So either dreams are fulfilled and there's nothing left to do after that, there's no more striving, there's no more yearning, or the dream is forever deferred, to use the words from a Langston Hughes poem, and in which case the regret or the loss of that unfulfilled dream makes up the remainder of the man's life. These are the 2 possible ways in which masculinity can exist in the life of human beings as the narrator has seen it. Now, the next paragraph offers a different version of humanity, a different vision of what it is that a human being can do with the time that's allotted to them. This is how the narrator puts it. Now, women forget all those things they don't want to remember and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth, then they act and do things accordingly. So, the first sentence of this paragraph seems a bit redundant and almost a bit overwritten. At first glance, it's the kind of sentence that might attract some red marks from an English teacher if it appeared in a student's English essay. The sentence is, now women forget all those things they don't want to remember and remember everything they don't want to forget. It's another way of saying that women have a very sharp, a very particular, a very selective memory. It's not so much memory as a passive recollection of things that happen. Memory here is an active tool of creation. Memory is a tool by which some human beings, and for the narrator, these happen to be women. Memory is a tool by which women create experiences. And the fact that the next sentence is about dreams allows the narrator to make a distinction between the way men and women operate. The next sentence is, the dream is the truth. Then they act and do things accordingly. So, the key difference in these two paragraphs is about the way dreams play a very important role in the lives of men and women. The different consequence or the different impact or the different impulse of dreams in the lives of men and women consists in the kinds of action they inspire these two kinds of human beings to undertake. Men either have their dreams fulfilled, in which case they slip into a sort of complacency, and if their dreams are not fulfilled, then they live a life of eternal and undying regret. So, in both cases, the focus is less on action and more on living with the consequences of the dream. Whereas in the narrator's vision, dreams inspire a different sort of energy in women. The dream is the truth, we are told. Then they act and do things accordingly. So, dreams are not so much a source of satisfaction or regret, they are, but more than that, they are an occasion for action. They are an occasion for an active form of striving. Now, in the first two paragraphs of the novel, these are some very vague ideas. We don't know what to make of these ideas, and these seem like highly impressionistic, anecdotal opinions because we don't have any data or any evidence against which to verify how persuasive, how truthful these ideas or these claims might be. Those things will be offered in the story that will be told in the next paragraph onwards. So the next paragraph introduces some data or invites us to partake of some data. What is that data? It involves the story of one such human being. The narrator tells us, so the beginning of this was a woman, and she had come back from burying the dead. Not the dead of sick and ailing with friends at the pillow and the feet. She had come back from the sodden and the bloated, the sudden dead, their eyes flung wide open in judgment. So, immediately we are told that the first two paragraphs about men, women, dreaming, it's not an abstract, it's not hanging in the air. Those ideas will make sense, or we will be invited to evaluate the veracity and the persuasiveness of those claims by understanding and observing some real information, something real, not just ideas, not just the narrator's thoughts, but the actual life of a person. And who is this person? It's a woman. So obviously, it persuades us that the claim about women's difference, women being a different sort of category, a different entity, a new set of information, data, a new occasion to sit down and reassess one's assumptions about what's what. That new category, as the narrator claimed it, will be described in greater detail. So, why? Because the novel we are reading is the story of one woman. And what has she done, and why is the narrator telling us about her? The narrator tells us that she had come back from burying the dead. And that itself is not a very remarkable thing. Burying the dead is a very common thing. People die all the time. And if a woman has left one place, let's say a woman has left her place of birth in order to make a life in a different location, and she loses some important family members to death, she buries them and then she comes back. That in itself is a very natural or common occurrence, and therefore in itself would not really occasion a 300-page novel. The narrator is aware of that and explains why this is not a usual case of burying the dead. It is not, we are told, the dead of sick and ailing with friends at the pillow and the feet. So it's not the case of literal dying. Rather, she had come back from the sodden and the bloated. The sudden dead, their eyes flung open in judgment, right? It's not that people have died. It's that people have come to a sort of judgment. People have changed their perception. People have, while they're alive, have said or thought or done something which reveals the judgment that they have passed, possibly with regard to this woman. And therefore, by this act, through this changed perception, which in turn has precipitated their judgment, right? And this judgment has come with some shock. It has shocked both those who are passing the judgment as well as others, but we are told about the shock with which they have passed this judgment. Their eyes are flung open in judgment. So, what has happened to this woman is that she has encountered people and she has undergone change in her relationship with people, with some people. These people have suddenly found it within themselves to judge her, and their eyes have been flung open in judgment. And through this judgment, they have been rendered lifeless in a way. So, although they are not dead in the traditional sense of people dying, they are dead and they have been buried by this woman, possibly because she has ended all social interaction. She has probably ended her relationship with these people. So now we are interested, or should be. Now we have sufficient grounds for appreciating the narrator's claim that men and women are indeed different, and the difference matters. In fact, the difference is among the most important intellectual challenges before us as readers of the English novel, as we might be in the 20th century. This was written for 20th century readers, although we are in the next century and we are about to cross a century since the novel was published. So we are explained that the choices a woman makes can make her a good candidate for an intellectual challenge to understand what really is going on in our world. So, what happens then, right? A woman has come back from burying the dead, and the story begins. What happens when she comes back? We are told, we are given this one more paragraph. The people all saw her come because it was sundown. The sun was gone, but he had left his footprints in the sky. It was the time for sitting on porches beside the road. It was the time to hear things and talk. These sitters had been tongueless, earless, eyeless conveniences all day long. Mules and other brutes had occupied their skins. But now the sun and the boss man were gone, so the skins felt powerful and human. They became lords of sounds and lesser things. They passed nations through their mouths. They sat in judgment. I find this fourth paragraph, the last on this page, to be among the most powerful in the entire novel. I find it to be extremely poetic, almost metaphysical in its compression of quite an astounding range of metaphors and images. So I'll try to break it down very slowly. The first bit of information is very clear. People are sitting on their porches because it's sunset or evening time, and they are refreshed. They have a renewed sense of energy, and they are quite energetic in a way that contradicts the usual pattern of things. Why is that? Usually, the evening or the time of the sun's setting is usually seen as the end of the day. A very beautiful and brilliant novel by Kazuo Ishiguro is titled The Remains of the Day. And the most powerful moment in that novel happens at the end when the narrator Stevens reflects on his life and reflects for a moment on what evening means. And there's a very, very powerful description of the evening, and he reflects on how, at this late stage in his life, it is like his life was a day, and post retirement, he's in the evening of his life. And he calls it the remains of the day. So it's a very poignant image in the Ishiguro novel, but it is in line with the conventional idea that now that the sun has set, everything important that had to have happened has already happened, and there's nothing left or nothing that can happen that will be too important. Basically, the major energies are spent, and whatever is left is of secondary importance. Now, in this scene, although it is evening time and people are sitting on their porches, we are told that this is a time when people are really in their own spirits. This is the time that they finally have control of their bodies and of their minds. So it's a reversal. Typically, one would expect these people to be tired, but actually, they are not tired. In fact, they are more energetic and more free than they were earlier in the day. Why is that? It's because we are told. So first of all, we are told that it was the time to hear things and talk. So people are relaxed and they are in the mood for having some gossip. They're in the mood for trading some malicious comments about people who are not there. So it's a sort of innocent, harmless, entertaining chat, which might involve making some malicious comments about other people, but they feel that they have earned it. And why do they feel that they have earned it, or why is this gossip or is this occasion for gossip? Why might it be an expression of their freedom and agency, which was suppressed earlier? We are told that these sitters had been tongueless, earless, eyeless conveniences all day long, which means that they were not expected to use their senses, tongueless, earless, and eyeless. So these things were not required, or the use of these capacities to speak, to see, to hear, these senses were not utilized. What was utilized? Their bodies, their laboring bodies were utilized. And the next sentence tells us, mules and other brutes had occupied their skins. So it's a very violent image, but also very tragic. It tells us that during the daytime, these people, they were simply working for other people, right? Because they could not afford to own their labor. They were forced to sell their labor. And so it was as if within their skins, mules and other brutes had taken possession of their bodies and were working. So mules and brutes here is used to describe an organism or a body that labors in silence and almost without consciousness. So they were senseless, laboring bodies. And now that the workday has ended, and we are told that the sun and the boss man were gone, their skins felt powerful and human. So suddenly, the end of the workday, the removal of external control, right, has brought with it this sort of a freedom. And we are told that they became lords of sounds and lesser things. So again, they are lords not just of their bodies, but they're also lords of sounds and lesser things. This is a very pointed insight because the act of lording it over someone or something is not a particularly nice thing. It has connotations of violence, it has connotations of inequality, the ability of one person or one category of persons to inflict violence, pain, and to extract resources from another person or category of persons. That inequality, that hierarchy exists here as well. Now that they have control, these poor black village people, now that they have some control, they lord it over lesser things. And what are lesser things? We'll soon find out that for a lot of people sitting on their porches, watching this woman come back after burying the dead, this woman who is now alone, who has now come back to a place that she had earlier left because she has had to bury the dead in another place. This figure, this woman who has returned, is a lesser thing for them, and they decide to lord it over her. It's a very vindictive sort of act, but the narrator is, you'll notice, quite careful not to pass judgment. In fact, we can trace this style of observation, this style of paying attention, and this style of description as something that Hurston developed during her years of doing fieldwork and during her years as a scholar and as a student of anthropology. This paragraph, this description of people who are suffering, have suffered during the day, and have only a few hours of respite in the evening, it seems that for the narrator, in a way, these people have earned some sort of a right, the right to be unfair in their own way, to pass a very harsh judgment on someone or something that in that moment is lesser than them. Are they right? Are they wrong? Obviously, it is unfair that they inflict their judgment on this woman, who in this case is a lesser thing. But narrator does not really make any effort to guide the readers towards any judgment of whether they are right or wrong. The moral insight into who's right and who's wrong emerges much later. In fact, the narrator's method is to be very quiet and to simply present before the reader a lot of observable facts, and from these facts to invite the reader to arrive at a position from where a moral judgment can be made. At this early stage, the reader is invited to simply accumulate a lot of data. There will be several moments of judgment, and there will be several moments in which the reader will find it quite difficult to be neutral. In fact, this is an extremely polarizing novel. In fact, there are descriptions of quite graphic and quite disturbing scenes of violence. And so the reader is not really allowed to stay neutral. But aside from those scenes where violence is quite graphic and it is quite easy to see the source and the object of such violence, there are several moments in which judgments are passed and characters occupy a very ambivalent gray area between clearly black and clearly white. And this is one of those. Now, I'll quickly read one more paragraph from the same chapter before ending this lecture. And this paragraph describes, in a sort of a collective summary, the combined thoughts of all of these people. And this, again, is something that comes directly from Hurston's anthropological training. It's a paragraph that presents, in double quotation marks, several questions and comments. We are not told who is saying what. We are simply presented the idea in a quotation mark. But we are also told that together, all of these thoughts, all of these questions create an aggregate image. They create a consolidated figure made up of all of the thoughts and judgments that are held by a lot of people together. So even though these are separate individuals because the tendency of their thoughts leans in one direction, which is to blame this woman for her own fate. The narrator clubs all of these quotations in one paragraph and helps build this impression that even though these are individuals, they actually constitute one voice. And it's a very powerful voice because all of these individuals together hold one view, which is that this woman who has returned after burying the dead is the one to blame, and it is her fault for having brought herself to this situation. And here one can see very powerfully Hurston's anthropological training. I'll read that paragraph, but before that, there is a framing paragraph which prepares the reader for this long list of quotations. Seeing the woman as she was made them remember the envy they had stored up from earlier times. So they chewed up the back parts of their minds and swallowed with relish. They made burning statements with questions and killing tools out of laughs. It was mass cruelty. A mood came alive, words walking without masters, walking all together like harmony in a song. And before that, I actually remembered a sentence from the previous paragraph, which was that they passed nations through their mouths. They sat in judgments. Passing nations through their mouths. It's a very pointed comment about the Middle Passage, but also about the African diaspora in the early 20th century. The Middle Passage describes how several individuals were forced in ships as chattel to the Americas, and the African diaspora of the 20th century describes how, after the end of slavery, there were several mass migrations, mostly towards the north of the continental US, but also across the Caribbean. So, when the narrator says that this group of people sitting on their porches passed nations through their mouths, the narrator is also saying that this was an extremely multinational, transnational group. Although it seems to be a very backward, a middle of nowhere, obscure village in the US, and this is Eatonville, Florida. And in fact, the novel is sort of a history of Eatonville. It's a history of how a small group of slightly wealthy black men, in fact, one man, and that is Joe Stark, who had accumulated a few dollars from having been able to work as a freed slave in Atlanta, managed to purchase a stretch of land, civilize it, build a city on it called Eatonville. So, in a way, this novel is a history of the place where Hurston had settled and spent much of the formative years of her childhood. But we are told that watching this woman walk back into their town, these individuals, they chewed up the envy they had stored from other times, and they wanted to, in a way, act out their vindictiveness. So, and what are these questions? I'll read the questions and then end this lecture. What's she doing come back there in them overhauls? A quick comment about the language and my pronunciation. A lot of the quotations that I'll read from this novel in this and the next video, they are all transliterations or transcriptions of Black vernacular. And a lot of the words of standard English are spelt and pronounced differently. I will not be able to reproduce that in my reading, so I'll try to manage as best as possible while trying to give you all a sense of how that would sound in standard English, while also trying to give a sense of the different accent and the different sounds that are produced when the narrator transcribes these speeches. So, what are these people saying? What's she doing come back here in them overalls? Can't she find no dress to put on? Where's that blue satin dress she left here in? Where all that money her husband took and died and left her? What that old 40-year-old woman doing with her hair swinging down her back like some young gal? Where she left that young lad of a boy she went off here with. Thought she was going to marry, where he left her. What he done with all her money. Betcha he off with some gal so young she ain't even got no hairs. Why she don't stay in her class, and so on. Now, as you can tell, these are some extremely malicious, violent set of questions and comments. And the narrator clearly sides with Janie Crawford, which is the protagonist, and we can also say that she is the narrator's favorite. But this sympathy for Janie does not come in the way of the narrator trying her best to give us all a sense of where these people are coming from and why their anger might have a context. It does not excuse their anger, but it tries its best to give us a sense of what history, what material conditions these people must have lived through in order to feel that they had a right to inflict this sort of anger and this sort of violence on what is simply just a poor woman, right? So I'll continue in the next lecture with more quotations from the early chapters of this novel, but I'll stop here now. Thank you.